Sorry? Right, okay. Just returning back to the agenda. In terms of the process today, anyone have any? The Hall, did your question process?
My question is really a point of fact, and it might be really easy to dispense with me if I ask this question, because I think I'm down for policy TR1, looking at my letter, and it simply says about Surrey Canal Road, which was proposed in the... And I think it's been renamed, and if that TfL could confirm, I explain why. That it was.
Yeah, I'm sort of slightly impatient and to get through my opening yet. So if you don't mind bearing with me, as soon as we get to TR1, we'll deal with your point first, if you like. I'll just complete my opening first. So can the council clarify if there are any housekeeping matters in terms of any sort of fire alarms planned, that sort of thing?
There's no fire alarms planned, and the fire exits are clearly labelled. The rendezvous point is next to the Costa Cafe out in the Broadway facilities outside to the left.
Thank you. And just before we get into the agenda, can I ask participants for today's session to introduce themselves, please, starting with the council?
Good morning, Ma'ams. Andrew Fraser, Urquhart King's Council for the authority.
Good afternoon, Dean Gibson, Principal Planning Officer.
Hello, Julia Robbins, Lewisham Council.
David Syme, I'm the Head of Strategic Planning at Lewisham.
And good afternoon, Nick Fenwick, Director of Planning at Lewisham.
Sean McGrath, the BSP, on behalf of Sainsbury's.
Josephine Voss, Transport for London, London Plan Manager.
Chris Porter, Major Projects Manager at Transport for London.
Greg Newton, Town Planning for the Bakerloo line. Chris Porter.
The name again?
Newton.
And Alan Hall, I made a representation. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for that. So moving on to policy TR1. Participants happy to take Mr. Hall's point first before we move on. So Mr. Hall, your point was in relation to the naming of the Surrey Canal, is that right?
Yeah, as a point of when I composed the letter, I couldn't find the necessary references, and of course things may well have moved on, but I did notice on the council's website when I checked that a new station called North Deptford was being proposed, and that may explain why I couldn't find Surrey Canal Road mentioned. The name may well have just changed.
Council, clarify that, Mr.
Yes, no decision on the naming of the station has been made. Also, I'm not sure that that's relevant to the local plan examination, the naming of a station. We refer to it as Surrey Canal Triangle Station, and as I said, no, as far as I'm aware, I'm looking to my TfL colleagues, there's no decision yet on the name of the station.
That's correct. There's no decision on the name of the station.
Is included in the plans, in the opportunity area plans?
Yes, the council refers to it as Surrey Canal Triangle Station. Correct, yes.
Does that answer your question, Mr. Hall? Should we pause for a moment if you wish to leave? You don't have to leave, but if you wish to leave, you may do now. Okay, thank you. So policy TR1, and my first question in the MIQs there, are the schemes set out in table 12.1 and any necessary land, building space and supporting infrastructure shown on the policies map as safeguarded? Be helpful to have microphones that are a bit closer, having to lean forward. So question 7.1 of the MIQs, are the schemes set out in table 12.1 and any necessary land, building space and supporting infrastructure shown on the policies map as safeguarded? So this, in the policy itself, we have table 12.1. There's a list of schemes, public transport schemes, healthy streets and active travel. And my question was, are those schemes set out in the table shown on the policies map as safeguarded?
I can take that question. I'll just refer to the MIQ answer that we provided, and it does say that the Bakerloo line extension is formally safeguarded, but none of the other schemes are safeguarded.
So on that basis, why are those schemes listed whilst others aren't listed? What was the criteria for the inclusion of schemes in that table?
The schemes that could potentially assist Lewisham in its goal to promote sustainable transport going forward. So the schemes that may come forward in the future, and it's been prudent to actually put them in there for now to bring that to developers' attention if they have a site that's near those particular schemes.
Were there some schemes not included in that list? Are there some schemes, for example, well, one of my questions is, are all of those schemes in the infrastructure delivery plan? Are there some schemes, for example, in the infrastructure delivery plan that haven't made into table 12.1? I'm just trying to get a feel for, why schemes were included in that table, whereas potentially other schemes may not have been.
Yeah, I'll just need to pause there and just check that for you.
Is this something we can revert to you on, or is it going to generate a follow-up series of questions?
I think it was just to establish a basis on which those schemes were included. I was just looking at the infrastructure delivery plan, and there's a table of strategic infrastructure lists for transport infrastructure.
Right.
You know, I think there are some schemes on there which aren't necessarily on the list in table 12.1. I just wanted to establish why some schemes are included and others weren't.
So I'll take that. Yeah. I can confirm the other schemes are in the infrastructure delivery plan. The reason I think they're not in is because they're not specifically funded schemes or scheduled schemes with timetables, whereas the Bakerloo line has a kind of committed timetable, if you like. The others don't at this time, but they're schemes that we're working with TfL, Network Rail, to actually bring forward at some point in the future.
And in table 12.1, though, there are schemes other than the Bakerloo line, aren't there? So, under Healthy Streets and Active Travel, A2 New Cross Road, A21, Healthy Streets Corridor, there are other schemes in there, but I think there are schemes equally in the IDP which aren't necessarily listed. I presume if schemes are in the IDP, then they are deliverable and funded.
Yeah, I think the title of the table is indicative list of strategic transport schemes, and I think that perhaps answers your question, that it's indicative and it's strategic kind of ambition. So they go beyond Lewisham, if you like. They're part of the transport package to promote sustainable transport within the borough, but also to allow schemes to actually facilitate travel out the borough as well.
Yeah, I mean, it brings, you've raised the attention to myself in terms of the title of the table, indicative list of strategic transport schemes. I think, you know, if they are indicative, it raises the question, should they be in that list? If you see where I'm coming from. But I think any project in that list should be more firm than just indicative. And I would imagine that all the schemes listed in the infrastructure delivery plan should be deliverable and fundable. I was just trying to get to the bottom of why some schemes were in and some schemes weren't. Is the key in this the term strategic?
Yes, I mean, they're all strategic schemes in that they, as I say, go beyond just serving Lewisham. They serve the whole of Greater London as well. So if you think about Bakerloo line, for example, it goes beyond the extent of just Lewisham's boundaries. And the other kind of stations are kind of nodal points within the transport network. And the healthy streets and active travel roads are strategic roads. So they obviously help to provide a route through Lewisham, again, and beyond Lewisham as well. And it kind of connects to some of the other transport policies we have to promote issues like walking and cycling and healthy streets. So, which is why healthy streets is kind of as a kind of subheading in the table itself.
Yeah, I was just slightly worried that there doesn't seem to be an approach to the inclusion of schemes in that list, given the response to my question. But I think it's something just to flag up maybe. Might be worth reviewing the list and the infrastructure delivery plan, just being clear, well, what is that list? What does that list mean? What are those schemes? And review the term indicative as well. I think they're in the policy. Presumably they are more than indicative. And I think the next few questions really relate to this point of safeguarding, and I think the council's response has helped with that in terms of recognising that there are, you know, obviously the first phase of the BLE line is actually safeguarded. So it's just being clear in terms of the difference between safeguarding from a ministerial point of view and policy safeguarding. And was there a proposed modification or suggestion on that front?
Yes, there was a proposed safeguarding modification. So in the response we've given to MIQ 7.2, it suggests the modification wording is, do you want me to read it out for you? So the land, buildings, space and supporting infrastructure required for the construction and operation of Lewisham's network of strategic and other transport infrastructure will be safeguarded and, where appropriate, to accord with formal safeguarding direction made by the Secretary of State for Transport, including for the schemes identified in Table 12.1. Development proposals will be required to provide adequate protection for and respond positively to the need to facilitate the delivery of the borough's network of transport infrastructure.
Do you feel that adequately distinguishes between formal safeguarding and policy safeguarding? It does say where appropriate to accord with formal safeguarding direction by the Secretary of State for Transport. I wonder whether it could be a little bit clearer in terms of the fact that you can also have policy safeguarding, if you like.
Yes, we can provide a suggestion to make it clearer.
On that point?
Only to say, Madam, I think it would be useful to clarify what is Secretary of State's safeguarding and the above ground works and below ground works, which aren't shown on the safeguarding in the plan, but they are shown on the Secretary of State's direction. And going on from that, I don't know, I think it might be helpful somewhere in the plan to say if the Secretary of State's direction is withdrawn and provide some guidance about what might happen about that. And I know HS2 direction has been withdrawn. There are implications of that, and it might be worth having something in the plan as a suggestion to say if it was withdrawn. So I think TfL have said the same thing. It'd be useful to refer to the Secretary of State's, but I think it'd be useful saying something along the lines of if it was withdrawn, what would happen?
And what's your view in terms of whether the suggested wording put forward by the Council, I will come to TfL in due course, whether that suggested wording adequately distinguishes between policy safeguarding and safeguarding
I think
the Secretary of State?
Sorry, I think TfL's wording is better, but I think it should differentiate between above ground and underground safeguarded land.
Can I just bring the Council in at that point, please, to address that point?
Yeah, I think the above ground safeguarding is a better way to go, because it actually is a wider extent in terms of meterage than the actual underground extent of the safeguarding. So the surface safeguarding will always capture the underground safeguarding anyway, because the underground safeguarding is in a much more condensed location, and that's within the area of the surface safeguarding. So I'm not really sure there's a need to actually differentiate between the two different types of safeguarding in regard to underground and overground in terms of the local plan. think we can leave that for a formal safeguarding direction in the Secretary of State's direction.
Is there a difference, so in terms of the implications of underground and overground works for development within that zone?
Not in terms of where development would go from a developer. Obviously, if they're doing works which are close to the underground works, that's already going to be within the overground works extent of surface anyway. So there'll be that kind of safety net in place anyway, if that makes sense.
Overground works would have a broader remit, essentially. Yeah.
Sorry, the overground works, the impact is a lot greater than the underground works. My client Sainsbury's, their store, the food store, will go because it's used as a work site. So I think it'd be useful for people to understand that, because I don't think, if you look at the plan now, you wouldn't have an understanding that the Sainsbury's store is going to go because it is a work site. And I think, I know for a fact it is an interest of local people, and I know some of the responses to TfL's consultation said keep the store. So that is something that people do want to know about. And I think that's just, if you went through the plan, you wouldn't realise, because you'd think it's all underground, and you have to have some knowledge, you have to look at the background, because so much of it's safeguarded. So I do think it would be helpful. And I do think it would be helpful to put in the plan, and maybe it's something we'll talk at other sessions, but I think it'd be useful to say what the implications of that safeguarding are, the work site, and what will happen as a result of the work site.
I'll bring TfL in at this point, please.
Sorry, man.
Sorry, you finished?
Sorry.
I mean, I think we've said in our representation, I think we would support greater granularisation and recognition of the difference between the policy safeguarding, which we support, but the statutory safeguarding as issued by the Secretary of State, which obviously has a greater standing, and I think that should be made clearer. I think we also agree there is a difference between safeguarding of surface and underground. The underground is actually far more extensive in terms of the safeguarding, but the implications are less. Although I disagree that the safeguarding results in the loss of the Sainsbury's store. Safeguarding doesn't give us planning permission to build the railway. We'd still need to go through a Transport and Works Act order, most likely, and it'll be at that point where we would have the right to build and have the impacts of that. So it's not the safeguarding itself. I think the other point I'd just like to raise in response to Sainsbury's comments, or WSP's comments, is I'm not sure we'd support anything around removing the safeguarding, because that would seem to be rather subjective and making assumptions about what may or may not happen in the future. As things are, the scheme is safeguarded, and I think that's the position that the plan needs to reflect.
I mean, in terms of whether that safeguarding is withdrawn, the formal safeguarding is withdrawn.
Yes.
Just while you're talking, in terms of the suggested modification by the council, in terms of whether the wording to address this issue, differentiating between policy safeguarding and formal safeguarding, whether you consider that addresses that sufficiently. I think TfL had put forward your own wording, hadn't you?
Just on that point, and it's in paragraph 7.2.2, again, that's not the wording TfL have proposed. I mean, it does differentiate between the two safeguarding matters, but again, as we've just pointed out, I think getting that more granular detail would probably be beneficial, and that's something we'd be happy to work with the borough on. That's something suitable.
I think looking at the council suggested wording, I think it could be clearer in terms of the policy safeguarding and how that would work. So I think there's probably somewhere in between there. In terms of being efficient with hearing time, is that something I can ask the council?
Yeah, we'll take that away if we may, and we've heard what's been said, and what you said, Marlon, we'll come up with something.
We've moved on a little bit. I did have a question in terms of that list of schemes, actually, in terms of the certainty of the schemes in that list of table 12.1 coming forward. You know, if they're to be included and if there's to be policy safeguarding, then, you know, is there certainty that those schemes are going to come forward within the plan period? We'll discuss Bakerloo Line obviously in a moment, so just in relation to the other schemes.
No, as you say, apart from the Bakerloo line, there's no certainty that those schemes will come forward in the plan period.
Just to add to that, Surrey Canal Road Station is obviously a scheme which the council is promoting with TfL, with the landowner, and with the help of GLA, Lewisham Station and interchange. Again, the council is working with TfL and Network Rail on that. And then obviously there's the Bakerloo Line extension, which we're working on. Similar to the kind of Bakerloo Line extension, these are strategic, very complex schemes, which, you know, the council is very supportive of. But, you know, there is no guarantee and there is no guarantee funding associated with them. We think it's appropriate within the plan to reference these schemes which will contribute in the future to significant modal shift and promote those schemes in the same way as other local plans do and the London plan, but there is no absolute guarantee that those are going to be delivered.
It's just obviously in relation to criterion C, which states land, building, space and supporting infrastructure required for the construction of those schemes, including the schemes in table 12.1. Development proposal required to provide adequate protection for and respond positively to the need to facilitate the delivery of the borough's network of transport infrastructure. And I hear what you're saying about being complex schemes. I guess there's just an issue in terms of if the certainty isn't there, could there be an issue in terms of potential sterilisation of land, for example?
That isn't our experience on schemes that are being brought forward now. You know, I think it's prudent within the plan to identify those projects, and through the pre-application discussions that we have with our development partners, we you know, discuss how the scheme will respond and could respond to that. But you know, what we wanted to do as a council is to have these in, you know, the plan obviously goes to a period to 2040, and there is distinct possibility that these schemes will come forward within the plan, and therefore we feel we need to make reference to them so that developers and landowners are aware.
discussing the infrastructure delivery plan, obviously, at a later session. But I suppose it just raises the question in my mind in terms of, not just necessarily the BLE line, but in terms of other schemes and the extent to which, if those schemes don't come forward, the delivery of the plan is undermined.
No, I don't think so. The plan isn't predicated on the delivery of any of these schemes, but they are schemes that we want to happen within the borough. And maybe if I give an example of how this policy works. So, Connington Road in Lewisham Town Centre is a very dense development that is nearing completion. It's a tower to the north of Lewisham Station. We are aware and are working with TfL and Network Rail on the Lewisham Station interchange. And as part of that scheme, we have made provision for a new entrance to the station within that scheme. That seems to have worked very well. It's a scheme, again, which is delivering high quality homes, affordable housing, plus it has future-proofed the Lewisham station and interchange scheme.
Okay, thank you. Given, the BLE line, we have the formal safeguarded route, don't we? I think it slightly concerns me about the uncertainty of the delivery of some of those schemes, including that table, and particularly including the table in the policy itself, given the uncertainty surrounding the delivery of those schemes. And I wonder whether it's a way forward to alleviate my concerns if that table were in the supporting text. And I think it might be useful to, maybe clarify the status of those schemes if there is some uncertainty surrounding them. And my other question was whether those schemes, obviously the Bakerloo line scheme is, but whether those schemes are on the proposals map, the policies map.
The Bakerloo line extension obviously is, but the other schemes are not. And I think we can take away the suggestion of moving the table to the supporting text. Yes, I think as long as we have reference in there within the plan to some of these significant infrastructure projects that the council is promoting, and I think we'd be happy with that change.
And just thinking pragmatically in terms of how the policy may be used, if a planning application came in which potentially was on land which could affect the delivery of one of those schemes, what would the council's approach be if they're only indicative, if there's no certainty surrounding them? I think Bakerloo line is probably a slightly different case, but how would the council deal with that in a planning application?
Yeah, at pre-application stage, we'd obviously bring the matter to the attention of the developer. With major development, which is likely to be the ones that are impacted by safeguarding, we would consult TfL as a matter of course anyway. So there would be discussion, and TfL have their own pre-application service as well. So there would be opportunity to raise that with the developer and bring it to their attention at an early stage to factor in the potential long-term aspiration to actually deliver these transport improvements.
It just raises questions in my mind in terms of the wording of criterion C. So the policy that the schemes other than the Bakerloo line aren't identified on the proposals map. So the policy states that those the routes of those infrastructure projects would be safeguarded, but it's not really clear, is it, from the policies map where those schemes are, you know, in terms of the location, how would a developer know where those schemes are? If there's uncertainty surrounding the scheme, can the council be so bold as to say those schemes, would, you know, the land, etc., would be safeguarded if there is uncertainty surrounding those schemes, and if those schemes aren't identified on the policies map, you know, it sort of almost weakens the case to a degree, doesn't it?
If I may, come in, and maybe it's to do with the nature and the scale of the kind of proposals, and it may well be that because officers are embedded within the process, we understand the extent of change and significance in terms of the interchange. None of these, apart from the Bakerloo line extension, require substantial land in order to deliver or substantial private land to deliver some of the changes. So the Lewisham Station interchange is primarily about a significant improvement on Network Rail and TfL land. The Surrey Canal Road station is about a transport project which the facility is already there, and we've worked with the developer to ensure that within an outline planning application that has a resolution to grant. So I think it's I think maybe if the council can take that away and take a look at Part C and maybe reflect on some of your concerns, and if we may, we can make some suggestions about the wording to alleviate those concerns, hopefully.
And you know, we need to be consistent in our approach, and certainly in terms of other plans, I wouldn't necessarily allow a table like that, or that the level of safeguarding proposed in Criterion C to schemes which may or may not happen. So we have to be consistent in our approach. I think that from what you've said, there's a big difference between things like the BLE line, which is formally safeguarded, and some of those other schemes. And I think, and it may well come down to that policy safeguarding. It raises the question of whether those schemes are policy safeguarded if they're not even on the policies map. If you see where I'm coming from, normally policy safeguarding, there would be some indication, I think, on terms of the plan. But I think you need to think about the difference in approach between the schemes, and whether Criterion C would necessarily apply to all of those schemes.
Yeah, we'll take that away. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to MIQ 7.3, possibly an easier question to answer. Would the policy be effective in encouraging a modal shift to more sustainable transport modes? I'll start with the council.
Yes, it would. And TfL support that in their written statement as well. And come on to the same query later when you want to, but we do think it would encourage a modal shift to other forms of transport, so away from the car into to public transport, basically, and other forms of transport. And that's because it enables people to have a choice, an opportunity to use those different forms of transport. And because of Lewisham's circumstance as well, it's a borough you can get around easily by public transport, and people use it a lot to do that, and anything that can assist them to do that and move away from the car travel promotes sustainable transport.
Thank you. TfL, please. Is your Toblerone still up from?
If this is related to the overall policy rather than BLE specific, I can cover it. Yes, I would definitely say we do support the council's view on this. I think integrating land use and transport planning is probably the most fundamental key important policy approach to generating sustainable travel. And I think the optimizing site capacity and things like that and making best use of land, these are the key elements in creating a city in which travel behaviors are made much, much more sustainable than they would otherwise be.
Thank you. Yes.
Hold on. Sorry, in the case of the Bakerloo line extension, both Lewisham and New Cross Gate, I think the P-Tower is 6B for both of them. So they are very, very accessible at the moment. Will the works on the Bakerloo line and other related works make any difference to people deciding to take sustainable choices when the P-Tower at them is 6B already?
Can I just ask the council to respond first? I usually will go to the council as it's their plan, but I shall bring you in.
Just a rebuttal to that, there's no evidence that the Bakerloo line wouldn't do what you say. That it wouldn't actually, you haven't provided any evidence that it wouldn't actually provide a modal shift to public transport. So you can argue that both ways. Because there's no evidence provided by Sainsbury's that it wouldn't provide a modal shift. In terms of the actual Bakerloo line extension itself, it would obviously increase the capacity, the network capacity of the railway system, underground system to move people about. For example, the Elizabeth line that's recently being completed, previously called Crossrail, 600,000 journeys made on that each day. So I think it does provide evidence that there could be certainly a modal shift to more sustainable transport use, and particularly the P-Tower actually perhaps makes it even more accessible to people to actually use and to get to places like Wembley, which the Bakerloo line serves. So if you're going to a football match, for example, you could go to Wembley on the Bakerloo line directly. At the moment, you'd have to change stations.
I think it probably is fair to observe when one talks specifically about the Bakerloo line extension that there is a particular, with the frequency of trains and simply psychologically, that using the tube is a different proposition from using overground or buses or whatever. There is a particular attraction in London to use of the tube, and it's always been a psychological part of life in London that, as it were, south of the river, and particularly southeast London, has been poorly served by well, there aren't any tube lines. And that is something in terms of considering modal shift that you are entitled to put some reliance on, I would submit.
Sure, TFR would like to respond to that point.
Yes, thank you. I think just in terms of evidence, if you look at page 7 of the Moving London Forward report, which is exam 1, that does give some figures around the work that has been done. So we anticipate there'd be at least 150,000 extra public transport trips per day and 21,000 fewer car trips. So that sort of sets out our assessment of what the Bakerloo line extension would do. I think beyond that and the reasoning, it's very much sort of in line with what the council have set out. It's not just about access. We accept New Cross Gate and Lewisham do have very high P-Towers, but that's effectively saying they're being served by high capacity, but it doesn't direct where they're going. I think the other locations aren't quite so high, elsewhere in Lewisham or elsewhere. And there is the point, quite rightly raised, around frequency. A train every 2.5 minutes is quite different from one every 15. Going along the Old Kent Road, getting to locations such as Waterloo, such as Paddington, such as Oxford Circus, in minutes rather than hours, or closer to several minutes rather than half an hour or more, does make quite a big difference, and it's a lot more than just accessibility.
just the point I was going to make. It's not necessarily taking people out of cars and private cars. It just might be a different type of transport, but all public transport. I think that's a point I think I want to make, because they are accessible by public transport at the moment. It's whether there will be a step change in the number of people getting out of their cars and using sustainable means.
Sorry, just one final point. I think you're right, it's not just about people getting out of their cars, although the work we've done suggests that, but it's also with new homes, making sure that people get public transport rather than have cars in the first place, and I think that's a key part of this as well.
Yeah, just to echo that, the entire approach to mode shift, in the Mayor's transport strategy modelling, we did a big modelling exercise across all of London, looking at the London Plan growth figures, the employment forecasts, and our plan for transport at the city level. And the most effective thing in driving mode shift in that assessment was the approach to integrating land use and transport planning, really keeping a lid on the provision of car parking, and creating places that are walkable, compact city style, where you have high density living. And as you, and we have plenty of evidence to show that as London has densified and as parking provision has gone down across the city, households make more and more trips by all the sustainable modes, so active travel and public transport. So, you know, a key stat that we always kind of try to bring people back around to is people living in households without access to a car make 90% of their trips by sustainable modes. So it's not just the provision of the Bakerloo line extension, it's that plus the high density housing, plus the cap on car parking that brings together the kind of holistic thing that delivers the mode shift.
Okay, thank you for that. Any further points in relation to policy TR1?
Madam, could I just make one point, just in the list of 12.1, they've got the list of schemes, and I do accept your point about whether they're deliverable, and I think there's no certainty whatsoever that the Bakerloo line will be delivered. But I do wonder, in that list, should they have the Baker Loop that I think the Mayor's talking about introducing, that would cover the route of the Bakerloo line? And I've only seen, I think the Mayor mentioned it or talked about it before the election, and I don't know whether TfL could say anything about that, whether that should be something that should be included in the plan, just as something that might come forward in the future.
Can the Council respond to that, please?
Yeah, I mean, this is a relatively new idea that's been promoted recently. I mean, you know, the Council reiterates again that we obviously have the Secretary of State safeguarded direction for the Bakerloo line extension. The local plan reflects that, and the Council is very supportive of the Bakerloo line extension. Yeah.
Just to add from a TfL perspective, this is a relatively new proposal. It came from the current mayor when he was campaigning to be re-elected, so it was a manifesto commitment. He's only been in role again for around about a month and a bit, so we're still understanding how Bakerloo works, but it is worth noting in the manifesto and in the comms, it was very much set out as an interim measure until such time as the Bakerloo line is delivered. And as yet, we don't know when it comes, how long it's there for, or where it may go. That's got to be worked out as we work with City Hall and colleagues running the bus network. So it's a concept and something we're looking at, but we can't say much more about it at the moment, I'm afraid.
Yeah, and just to make that point, it was mentioned as an interim solution, and I think just going back to our previous point about the psychology of modal shift, there's an entirely different psychology to having a branded bus along the Old Kent Road through to New Cross and Lewisham, if indeed that's where it goes, versus having Lewisham connected to the tube map, which our residents overwhelmingly support. There is, with the frequency, with the connections, there is an entirely different psychology.
Okay, thank you. I mean, we've moved kind of on to policy TR2 anyway. We've obviously been discussing the Bakerloo line in earlier sessions and also today. In Tuesday's session, was it? It's becoming all a bit of a blur now. I did ask TfL whether there was more detailed evidence to support the proposed timeline for the delivery of the BLE line, and whether that could be submitted to the examination. Can I ask for an update on that, please?
Yep, you certainly did. We committed to providing that. I've got people at the office pulling it together as we speak, so the ambition is to get that to you by the end of this week.
I am conscious that not everybody here today was around the table on Tuesday or Wednesday. Is it worth just providing a summary of the that you provided to ourselves in terms of the detailed time frame, just for the benefit of Sainsbury's there?
It'd be really helpful.
Yep, I can do that. So as things stand, we have a programme to delivery that looks at a number of potential delivery scenarios, whether that is delivery of only the safeguarded scheme to Lewisham, whether it is the phase 1 and phase 2 scheme concurrently. So that's going to Lewisham and then going to Hayes and Beckenham Junction at the same time, or whether we have a scheme that would go to Lewisham initially with phase 2 to follow. We're currently working through the options for that, but the programme we have shows that that could be delivered by 2038. That's what we're working to. I think there is inherent uncertainty in that schedule, as there would be for any large-scale development, which is dependent upon a number of factors: funding, planning, further public consultation, decisions we may need to make on contracting and delivery approaches. But we believe that is achievable and deliverable, and that's informed by quite significant work that we as an organisation have done on similar schemes such as the Northern Line extension, Crossrail, Silvertown Tunnel. So that's where we're working to.
Can you just clarify, you referred to that 2038, can you clarify what you envisage being delivered by 2038?
Certainly we could deliver either the phase 1 scheme alone or the phase 1 and the phase 2 scheme, subject to decisions around funding, affordability, risk and other factors. So we're currently at a stage of design where we're expecting to confirm the preferred option by mid to late 2025. I think our programme has that in the autumn of 2025, at which point we'd be able to confirm which route we expected to go, again, subject to public consultation and funding planning. We are fully funded for that stage of work. The scheme is in the TfL business plan, it's supported in the Mayor's transport strategy and the London plan. We don't have funding yet committed for phases beyond that, albeit that's not unusual for schemes at this stage, when we'd expect to have our funding strategy and our funding statement prepared in advance of any Transport and Works Act order submission.
Clarify for the other participants' benefit, the stage that is funded is that kind of design stage, if you like, of the project planning stage, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And where does TfL envisage, and how does it envisage securing the funding for the next stage in terms of bringing the project forward on the ground?
So we are examining a number of options for funding, as alongside partners Lewisham, Southwark and elsewhere, working with Central London Ford, as well as talking to central government There are a number of strands we're looking at, including sources of funding from each of those parties. Those discussions remain ongoing. I think Southwark may have confirmed the other day, but they've recently committed 50% of their strategic SIL to the scheme, and we're working within the confines of the TfL business plan around planning our year-on-year spend, and as things stand, that money is within the TfL business plan for this stage of work. But not yet. The next stage of work, which will be the conversations that we will have during the next business planning periods.
Just you raised the point of SIL there, which reminded me I was going to ask the council in terms of the council's SIL. Is there a mechanism to secure funding for strategic projects such as a Bakerloo line extension through the council's SIL, which would go towards the Bakerloo line?
We have got SIL in place, but we currently haven't made a decision yet on the Bakerloo line extension, but it is a strategic transport project that the council fully supports, and as part of the work that TfL have mentioned, part of the conversation will be around about the commitment from Lewisham in terms of the proportion of SIL that existing and future.
And could that be dealt with through the current SIL in terms of just proportioning the contribution towards strategic infrastructure projects? Would it require a review of SIL?
It could be done through the existing SIL arrangements and SIL governance structure that we have in place.
So just in terms of the proposed timeframe that you've outlined, it would be really useful to see the additional work that's been carried out on that and to support those timeframes. I just wanted to give Sainsbury's the opportunity to comment on that, because I know you raised concerns about the timeframe in your representations.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it'd be useful to get something concrete and have an understanding of the cost. And I think Sainsbury's concern is there's never been a cost-benefit analysis to see is it worth the money it's going to cost. And I think that's part of the problem. I mean, I assume this work is somewhere in the background, but it's actually having it so people can look at it and scrutinise it. And I don't know, Inspector, I don't know if this would be a good point to raise it, or time to raise it, but I did look at the evidence base, and it talks about how many jobs and houses the Bakerloo line extension will deliver to Lewisham, and that information's been updated, and the figures have got. Shall I give you the reference? I don't know if it's a good time to raise it. It's, I think in the evidence base it's EB61, which is the brochure about Bakerloo line, and then it's exam 1, which is I think an update of that. In the original one, it talks about 13,000 new jobs and 110,000 new houses. So that was in 2020. Sorry, have you got those references? I don't know if I'm rushing through. The EB61, there's no paragraph numbers. I'm not even sure. I think it's in the first couple of pages. It talks about 13,000 new jobs, 130,000 new jobs and 110,000 new houses. It's under the heading Levelling Up London. And then in the exam 1 document from March this year.
Was your question as to where those figures have come from?
Well, I mean, it has dropped from 110,000 to 20,400 in terms of housing, new housing. And I just wonder where that's come, because there must have been some work done in the background to explain that change.
And I'm purely guessing here that it may be through the development of the firming up of the local plans that are coming forward and more definitive figures, but I think it's for TfL to answer that question, really.
And it goes back to my point about the cost benefit of doing it. If since 2020 it's massive, probably 500% reduction in the number of houses that will be delivered as a result of it.
I'll just need to check the data and talk to colleagues at Lewisham, as this was a report that was not done by TfL, it was done by Central London Ford, Lewisham and Southwark. My suspicion is that I know the 110 figure refers to the number of new homes across the entirety of London as a result of the upgrade and the extension, so it captures places like Old Oak Common and Paddington, but I will need to just check the other numbers and get back to you later this afternoon.
Has there been a sense check of those figures in terms of the figures emerging, for example, from local plans across London boroughs or the relevant London boroughs?
The original figure, as Chris says, just to confirm, was across the whole of the line.
The whole of the line?
Yeah.
I mean, is that something TfL could just confirm for our benefit for the examination?
Yeah. We can certainly confirm the 110. I've just looked at that. I'm just looking at the other document.
I mean, I acknowledge they're very high level figures, aren't they? They're very strategic figures. But presumably they've come from somewhere, been drawn from somewhere. It would be helpful as an action point. And can I ask you to liaise with Mr. Kemp to do that? I don't know whether those figures will be available for today's session, though.
We can certainly confirm what the numbers are referring to in each of the reports. Yes, we will be.
That would be useful, thank you. Did you wish to raise another point? You were hovering there.
Well, I was going to say it'd be useful, wouldn't it, to work, if that was the evidence base, what the figures council were working on when they were talking about what the Bakerloo line extension will deliver for Lewisham. And I think it was, if they're the figures, I think if you're a member of the public, you will look at those figures. I think that is tied into the Bakerloo line extension. If it's not, how's that informed the council's decision about supporting it? And I'm sure it's all been thought through properly, but I think it is very confusing.
It would be helpful to know where those figures have come from.
Yeah, we can look at that and double check that. My understanding is that one document refers to the opportunity areas that are dissected by the Bakerloo line extension and upgrade across the capital, and then the other figure looks at and zooms into essentially the extension of the line, i.e. the Southwark and Lewisham proportion. That's my understanding, but we can certainly take it away and double check and reconfirm that.
Yeah, just to be clear, the 20,400 homes is specifically related to those that the extension will support within South East London, whereas the 110,000 in the 2020 report is referring to along the length of the Bakerloo line once it's extended. So they're different figures because they're referring to different geographic areas.
So when you say along the length of the Bakerloo line, is that including the existing line, not just the extension?
Yes.
Are there any questions in terms of timeframes or any other points that you wish to make? You know, obviously it would be helpful to have a more detailed sort of project plan, if you like, in terms of where the TfL are at with it. I appreciate it's difficult at this stage, isn't it, to give a more detailed programme because it hasn't been worked out yet. It's an incremental process, but it might give further confidence, if you like, to the examination of the Bakerloo line extension moving forward.
Yeah, that's no problem at all.
Thank you. Any other points in terms of the time frame from the council's point of view?
No, thank you.
Sorry, if I may, there is just one other point, just responding to the question around business case. I think we have just talked about 2 documents that have been provided that set out the case for the scheme. They're both public. We've also carried out 3 public consultations with masses and masses of information, including setting out the benefits of the scheme, the costs of the scheme, the impacts of the scheme. So I think there is an awful lot of information out there in the public domain. What we haven't done is submit all of that to this hearing, which I think most people will probably be quite grateful for, because it was our view that it wasn't the purpose of this hearing to run through evidence that has already been submitted. But there is a lot of information in terms of the costs, the benefits, various parts of the case for the scheme that are in the public domain.
I guess that includes the document I spoke about earlier, the socioeconomic impact assessment.
I mean, I think from the examination's point of view, obviously, as pointed out by the council, the plan isn't necessarily predicated on the Bakerloo line extension being delivered, but it wants to retain that flexibility to respond to the benefits of it, should it come forward in the plan period. And it's treading quite a difficult line in many ways, but I think it would certainly help our consideration if we had a greater certainty over the time frame. So I'm not sure we can go much further with the discussion until we've got that additional. Just moving on now, I'm conscious of time. In terms of the policy itself, and moving on to my question 7.5, very similar issue to the one we discussed in policy TR1 in terms of the differentiation really between the formal safeguarding of the phase 1 of Bakerloo line extension, and also the sort of part of the scheme which isn't formally safeguarded, and whether a clearer distinction needs to be made in terms of the policy. So I shall open that up for discussion. Can I start with the council on that, please?
Yeah, I mean, so in our written response, we've suggested that it's highlighted that the council has provided the proposals map in line with the safeguarding direction of Secretary of State, and Transport for London provided that to the council. So that's been applied to the new policy maps. In terms of the actual extra threshold, if you like, which kind of is in your next question as well, actually. I think the reason we've done that is just to provide, without trying to is to provide an additional information to the actual developers who come forward that there is a safeguarding proposal for the Bakerloo line extension. It's just to provide extra facility information to those developers to bring it to their attention, really. That's what we're trying to do. I mean, I think having the kind of 400 metre threshold actually provides that information quite clearly to developers that there may be potential, that there is a safeguarding direction in place, and they need to look at that very carefully. But it might extend beyond the actual direction of the Secretary of State in terms of distance and how that affects their development going forward. But also, kind of just going forward a bit, there is a modification proposed as well that you can see that we provided in the written question, written answer to the question. But I think our approach was to be cautious and to make developers aware that they needed to approach these sites with a degree of caution, particularly developments which fell within the direction. So obviously some developments will be exempt from it, but major developments are likely to be subject to it. So we just wanted to bring that to their attention at an early stage, and it gives officers in pre-application meetings an opportunity to bring that to attention as well, and to look at a certainly broader area, just beyond the safeguarding direction, if you like.
Okay, thank you. And the council has suggested a potential modification within its statement. In terms of 7.9, are any modifications necessary for soundness? I would like to open up the discussion, first of all, in terms of the degree to which those modifications have addressed this issue between formal safeguarding and sites or the route which isn't formally safeguarded. So if I can open that discussion up first.
Yeah, I think it's just the same point as I made previously. It would be useful to have the differentiation that is shown in the direction between subsurface and above surface that TfL have suggested. And I would say again, which it would be useful to say what the implications of that safeguarding are if something does come forward on the above ground sites.
So I have two suggested modifications before me in terms of the policy wording. I have the council's proposed suggestion, and I have TfL's proposed suggestion in terms of the modification. I would be interested to hear views on the council's approach from TfL's point of view. Whether you consider any modifications are necessary to their modifications.
We've discussed that today, and we've just kind of got a couple of additional words to add to that, but on the overall, quite minor, which we can share with yourselves. Thank you.
Just worth raising it now so I can make a note of it. I mean, by all means, it can be put in. It would be interesting to hear the council's view on any suggested changes to their wording. So if you could just flag those up now.
Yes, that's fine. Thank you. It might help if I just read from kind of the last sentence to that point, because it's quite a lot. So just where it says will not lead to excessive cost in the delivery or operation of the, and this is what we've added, of the BLE and will be compatible with the Bakerloo line extension. And then that continues during delivery and operation. And then the second point is on the last sentence, and it starts major development sites within 960 metres of a proposal BLE station should or must, depending on preference, submit an assessment on accessibility, public realm and enhancements to public transport.
One of my questions was where the 400-metre threshold came from. And then a different threshold appeared, 960 metres, and maybe it's getting a bit confused, but I would like to hear where those different thresholds have come from, please.
The first one, the 400 metres was a 5-minute walking distance from the station, and the 960 was actually in discussions with TfLs, and it was a distance that they suggested to the council.
I shall pass the question over then.
The measure of 960 is the distance we use for considering acceptable walking distances to stations or underground facilities. And generally, TfL have several of these distances, or if you were taking a bus or you were willing to walk further for kind of major infrastructure, and that's the 960 has come from that. So it's what we deem people are willing to walk towards a rail asset.
And just to add to that, it's also linked to PTAL. So PTAL is a 960-metre catchment around stations.
And 400 metres, I'm aware, is used elsewhere, isn't it, in terms of walking accessibility. What is the council, relatively content with the 960 metres in terms of, the fact that it would be a more of a major facility to walk to?
Yes, we are happy with that.
Okay, thank you. Can I just make that a formal action point in terms of progressing that particular modification that's in the statement?
Yes, that's fine.
The action point is to amend Part C of the policy to reflect the discussions and the proposed modifications put forward by the council together with TfL's suggested amendments to that policy, and just to progress that as a formal action point as a modification. On that before we move on to the next question? No. I think we've probably discussed around this question in previous sessions in terms of we have slightly different participants around the table. What mechanisms will the council utilise to ensure that development on sites in proximity to existing planned or potential future Bakerloo line stations is appropriately phased in order to secure the most beneficial use of land? And in previous discussions, I think the council acknowledged there's no formal phasing as such in order to benefit from the uplift, if you like, from the potential increased densities with the Bakerloo line, but acknowledging that the uplift will be likely on those sites to be towards the end of the plan period anyway. Is that an appropriate summary of the council's position?
I think you've covered that very well, and thank you. Yes.
And I just wanted to summarise that because I'm conscious you weren't there for that discussion. I think TfL were there, but it was, my point being really that, you know, that there's potential for increased densities and those are shown in the housing trajectory, but it's whether there was a need, I suppose, for a phasing mechanism to deliver those. But the likelihood is most of the sites would be coming forward towards the end of the plan period anyway. So it's not likely to be an issue, really. I think that was the council's position.
Thank you.
But I'm not gonna go back over that. And just an overarching summary, really, in terms of whether the policy is justified, effective and consistent with national policy and in general conformity with the London Plan. If I could ask the council to start.
Yes, I think obviously we've discussed some clarity and clarification that is required for the policy, which we will take away, reflect on and amend. Overall, I think the council is confident that subject to those amendments that the policy is sound and subject to the wording being agreed, and our TfL colleagues being happy with those wordings as well. We can progress with that. The GLA haven't issued any concerns regarding general conformity with the London Plan in terms of the policy.
Does TfL want to come in on that particular question? Are you happy if I do or say?
No, it's fine.
Did you have any further points?
I think we've sort of covered it in the written response, so I don't think I need to add to that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other points on policy TR2 before we move on?
Just on TfL's written statement, they asked for the word facilitate to be deleted from the policy.
Which part of the policy, sorry? I'm just trying to find it.
It's in part B of TR2, where it currently is worded, development proposals must demonstrate that they will facilitate and not preclude. Facilitate being an active promotion, I suspect, and TfL have suggested that that be deleted so that it simply be not preclude. That's correct. Yeah. That's what I think. Counterproductive.
Yeah. So,
well, we're going to come back with a review of the policy, so perhaps we can take that up with TfL directly rather than trying to ventilate it now.
I'd be interested just to hear TfL's position in terms of the reasoning behind that suggested change. Remember?
I think it was related to the fact that the details of the scheme are still being developed, so facilitate may be difficult to determine at an early stage, but I think it would be useful to have that conversation with the council just to clarify their understanding and we can reach an agreement.
Just make a suggestion. If it's help facilitate, that kind of solves the issue really from our point. I think the reason I've raised it is it could be counterproductive in negotiations with developers on actually seeking financial contributions towards the Bakerloo line extension. If the word facilitate is not in there, that actually undermines our position to actually do that.
And the sense of facilitate is a bit more proactive, as you say, than not preclude. Yeah, that's where you're coming from. And TfL says, see that?
I think we'd be happy with that.
Yes, you wish to raise
I think it should be taken out. It's very difficult when you have words like that in a policy to actually understand what it means. Because people will say, and I could understand if it was to try and get some money out of a developer, but it's very difficult. I would be happy, I'm supportive of TfL's wording, but when you actually have to deal with a policy that says facilitate, what does it actually mean? And when you try and get to the nitty-gritty of that, it's very, very difficult. I mean, it's clear, isn't it, saying it won't preclude, and that's sent, we can understand that. But to facilitate, I think, is just a difficult word to put in. And, you know, I agree with TfL's approach that it's not clear cut yet, so I would be supportive of going with TfL's draft.
Yeah, I'm just thinking from the council point of view, the plan has a 20-year lifespan in theory. And there is potential for the Bakerloo line to come within the back end of that plan period. So it's worth bearing that in mind, I think, in terms of any suggested changes to the wording. Interested to hear council's view on that.
I think the arguments have been put across that facilitate seems a more proactive approach and allows us then to look at contributions, etc. We'd be happier with that. I think if TfL were amenable to that as opposed to the word changing, then I think the council would prefer that position.
I think I understand.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It's such a long way ahead. So if the Sainsbury's store, we want to put extend something at the Sainsbury's store, no funding for the Bakerloo line extension yet, the council could say, well, you're not facilitating delivery of the Bakerloo line. It's just, I don't think the wording doesn't need to be in there.
Well, I've heard the discussion on it, and I can reach a view on that in my report, our report. I was just checking the mods there in terms of TL01 and 2. I think in terms of the modification schedule that was put forward, in terms of TR2, I think those modifications in the schedule are just reflecting the discussion we've had in terms of the suggested changes. But TR1, there's a suggested change in terms of the infrastructure delivery plans. Let's consider the suggested removal of references to the New Cross to Lewisham overground extension as part of the regular review of the infrastructure delivery plan. That's under the umbrella of TR1. I just wanted to clarify that before we move away from that policy altogether. In relation to the infrastructure delivery plan itself, or in relation to TR1?
Sorry, can you clarify that again, please, so we can find that?
Hopefully the council's team have got a list of the updated list of suggested modifications. Under the Chapter 12, Transport and Connectivity, there are a number of modifications proposed to policies within the chapter, The modifications to TR2 just reflect the discussion we've already had. There is a modification, though, suggested for TR1. It's under the umbrella of TR1, but it states infrastructure delivery plan. Consider the suggested removal of references to New Cross to Lewisham overground extension as part of the regular review of the infrastructure delivery plan. Maybe if colleagues could find a copy of that to assist you and just to clarify what it's in relation to.
Yeah, sorry, for clarity, it's an amendment to the infrastructure delivery plan and not to the policy.
Yeah. One. I was slightly confused.
Yes, apologies for that, yep.
We'll come on to that in that session. Right. Any other? So I'm conscious of time. I think it'd be useful to have a break. There are some other policies which we need to look at, but probably a slightly lighter touch than we have up to now. I do have some points on them, but I don't think we'll be too much longer for those of you wishing to watch the England match. Shall we say, depends how quickly you want to get away, doesn't it really? I was going to say 4:30, but that might be cutting it fine for the match. So, is that sufficient for everyone? So if we return at 4:20. Right, welcome back everybody. You'll be pleased to hear I don't have too many questions in terms of the other policies. It is getting rather warm in here, and I think it's been quite a long day. But there were just a few things I wanted to pick up. I will say where I'm happy to take the Council's written statement as read and the other statements as read, but do flag up if you do want to raise a point in relation to a particular policy. So, in terms of policy TR3, healthy streets as part of healthy neighbourhoods, I'm happy to accept the written statements on that, unless there were any particular points anybody wanted to raise. Is your nameplate up from the previous session? Yeah.
Sorry.
So we shall move on from that. In terms of policy TR4, is part B of the policy clear in terms of where car-free development will be supported? I could come to the Council first.
Thank you, Inspector. We think it's clear where it will be supported. It's in highly accessible locations, and that aligns with TfL's requirement for car-free development in highly accessible locations, PSAL 4, 5 or 6. And that aligns with the promotion, again, of sustainable transport. Sorry for repeating myself again, but it's about kind of encouraging modal shifts away from car use. I think encouraging people onto public transport, and again, building development in locations where public transport will be as well. So it certainly does provide that. TfL, in their written statement, they suggest a change, but because they want to refer to PSALs specifically in the policy, but we think actually that our policy actually achieves the same outcome in that we are suggesting highly accessible locations are car-free, and that aligns with the MPPF from September 2003, 2023, and that says it kind of moves away from maximum parking standards, and that's a latter policy document than the London Plan. So I think what I'm trying to say is that the actual policy framework has actually moved on, and it actually moves away from actually citing maximum parking standards in policy. And that's what we're doing in our policy. We're not citing PTAL 4, 5 or 6. We're just saying highly accessible in relation to that.
Okay, thank you. Did TfL want to respond to that?
Yeah, it's just a pragmatic kind of point from our perspective is that everyone in London appears to have a different idea of what good connectivity is. We have conversations with people in, living between Farringdon and King's Cross, which is, they love the stat that those are the two furthest apart stations on the tube network, and they think they don't have adequate access to public transport, but it's PTL 6, it's central London, there are buses everywhere, there's cycle lanes everywhere, and there's tube stops in every direction. So we just find it kind of unhelpful not to be very specific about what you mean by highly accessible, because you will have decision makers interpreting that as they see fit, rather than having a kind of consistent approach that is based on evidence instead of just perceptions.
Council like to respond to that point about the different perception, if you like, of accessibility.
I think developers will always refer to PTAL because it is a good system. We don't doubt that, but I think it kind of, as I say, it repeats what we're trying to achieve. And I know TfL was saying that the more highly accessible locations are the higher PTAL ratings, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you can't have car-free development in other locations, and they're not equally highly accessible or can't be made highly accessible through interventions such as restricting car parking permits, improving infrastructure through bus delivery, for example, or transport infrastructure like trains, railway improvements like we've just been talking about in the Bakerloo line extension. So, for example, in the south of the borough where Bell Green is, the Bakerloo line extension would go along to there. At the moment, that's quite a low PTAL, but it could be made highly accessible through the intervention of the Bakerloo line extension. In our opinion, that would make it, going forward, a highly accessible location when the Bakerloo line extension comes forward. So I don't think we need to, I think having a PTAL in place would actually, in some ways, discourage development rather than encourage it.
Reflecting the fact that accessibility could change over time, over the course of the lifetime of the plan.
Yeah, I can take your point, and the London plan is very welcoming of boroughs wanting to go further than the London plan, because we necessarily have to do the strategic approach that fits the whole of London, and where you do go beyond and have more restrictive parking standards than we have in the plan, we really do welcome that, and we do have supportive policy for that in the London plan. And we also do talk about existing and future PTAL as well to kind of reflect that point. I think it's just about the kind of wording, and I'd be more than happy to kind of take it away and just make sure that we can be assured that it won't be interpreted the other way. But we're very, very happy for boroughs to locally assess connectivity and say, you know, the PTAL's only 2 here, but we're going to go for car-free development. That is music to our ears, really. So.
So, Transport for London are going to have a think about the sort of potential implications of that. So it's not necessarily an action point for the council per se, as I understand it. Just on staying on car-free development, I asked a question as to whether all of the criteria under Part B apply for proposals for car-free development, and I believe the council has suggested well, if the council could just summarise their position on that, please.
Yes, we do feel that all the actual factors can be, all the parts can be met through the policy. Obviously, there'll be circumstances where a development won't meet all the criteria. That's because of the difference in size of schemes normally, like between minor developments, small major developments, and then large major developments. But we anticipate that they'll be able to meet all of the policies proportionate to their application.
And as drafted, there seems to be a either or for criterion A and B, and I guess that reflects that not necessarily all development would necessarily be an opportunity area, growth node, regeneration node, etc. So is it appropriate to keep that as either, you know, or?
Yeah, I'll take your point. I think that's something we can look at and certainly look to modify, I would say.
Then there's an and after that in relation to criterion C, there's an existing controlled parking zone, that's always going to apply? Is that correct?
Yes.
Sufficient capacity on the public transport network, is that always going to apply?
Yes.
I think it's just looking at the ands and the ors, isn't it, as to where those are, just to provide clarity.
It is intended to be one of the first two and then both of the last two.
Maybe it's an additional and between C and D then. So that could be an action point for the council to look at. The requirement for 20% of total car parking spaces to have charging points for electric or ultra-low emission vehicles. I mean, this came up actually in another examination I've done recently, in that, and the question was, has this requirement now been replaced by Part S of the building regs, enacted June 2022, which covers the provision of electric vehicle charging infrastructure. So my question is, sorry to throw this in there, it just came up in another examination, is it necessary to repeat it there? I mean, from our perspective, we wouldn't normally repeat something that's in other legislation. So I just wanted to flag that up. Well, I'm waiting to hear the council's response first. They're having a bit of a debate, I think. We'll let you know though.
I think the council is just concerned about things that wouldn't necessarily be covered within the building regs. I wonder whether or not we can take that away and just review that and then come back on that matter.
If it helps, for my own benefit, I included an extraction of Part S of the building regs. Requirement S1 covers the erection of new residential buildings. Requirement S2 relates to dwellings resulting from material change of use. Requirement S3 covers residential buildings undergoing major renovation. Requirement S4 covers erection of new buildings which are not residential buildings and mixed-use buildings. So I could go on, but so it seems to me to be quite comprehensive. There may be something TfL have come across. I noticed you wanted to come in there. But it's something I wanted to flag up to give the council the opportunity. But certainly from our perspective, we wouldn't normally repeat something in a policy which is covered by regulations elsewhere.
I would just note that the building regulations are comprehensive but very complex, and in some cases they do require things the London Plan doesn't require, and in some cases the London Plan requires things they don't require. So in summary, I would say keeping the provision is the simplest method, but you could of course go through the building regulations and check each one if you wanted to go through that approach.
I mean, the building regulations seem to set a higher standard than actually in the plan in relation to some components, and you know that exercise needs to be looked at in terms of, you say that there are elements of the London Plan which cover aspects that the building regs don't. So I think that's something the council need to go away and look at to consider a bit further, and it may be that the wording of the policy is refined to reflect that. And I think certainly, you know, in terms of the benchmark, that sort of 20%, that may have been overtaken anyway by the building regs. So.
Yeah, what we just discussed, with colleagues here is maybe we could actually put it in the supporting text. So take this part of the policy out and actually put the reference to the building regulations in the background text to the policy to bring it to the attention of developers.
It may be worth just looking at the London plan context if your TfL colleague is correct in that there may be some aspects that aren't quite covered. It does seem quite comprehensive, but I'm sure there's the devil's in the detail there. So can I leave that? That is an action point now. If you can note that down, please. Thank you. If we can just check any modifications that are listed, albeit they may be overtaken by our discussions.
Yes, there's a modification suggested, paragraph 12.27 in the supporting text, which is measures such as opposed to the use of car clubs. And then again, in the supporting text, a new paragraph 12.28, which says car clubs can serve to support car-free development. They are best implemented in association with reductions in the overall number of parking spaces being provided in an area. Simply adding car club cars to areas with lots of parking is not an effective way to reduce car ownership or use, and only serves to increase the dominance of vehicles on the street in new developments. Consequently, car clubs should be deployed as a means to reduce the overall volume of parking, specifically in locations of where they can provide for occasional car use for households that are prevented from owning their own car, or where parking levels are low, and they should include electrical or electric vehicle charging points.
Okay, thank you. And that's really clarification, isn't it, of the role of car clubs. I don't have a particular issue with that. Looking at TfL to see if there are any comments on that proposed modification.
No, it reflects the approach that we take. Thank you.
Okay, so that I think covers my questions in relation to TR4. If there aren't any other comments or suggestions or modifications. Just in relation to the next few policies, TR5, deliveries, servicing and construction. I had no specific comments to make on that. Any points? Nope. Taxis and private hire vehicles, equally I had no points to raise on that.
Yeah, there is a few modifications that we are suggesting for TR06. So the first one is just a deletion of some text. So it is suitably demonstrated that there will be no adverse impact on amenity in the highway network, including existing on-street parking provision. We're suggesting the deletion of including existing on-street parking provision.
And what's your reasoning behind that?
Yes, I've been reminded that it's a TfL recommendation.
That may be the case, but it is your plan. So, you know, from the council's point of view, is the council happy with that suggested modification?
We are, yes.
So I'd be interested to hear the reasoning behind this suggested modification.
Yeah, I think we're satisfied because I think what we don't want to do is discourage taxis and private hire vehicles from operating. And if there's space on the street where they can operate from, then we're happy to support them to do that.
Okay, thank you. Take a view on that. The next modification, consider and clarify accordingly the use of words on and in part B of the criteria. Is that in relation to TR06? No, we've done that, haven't we? We've done that. It's fine. Sorry, it's been a long day. So I think we've covered the modifications for all of that policy. It's TR7, if there aren't any other points on there. Digital connectivity. Again, I had no particular comments in relation to that. Just checking around the room. Any other points to make? Any modifications on that one? We have MO 81. Seems to be a typographical error. And MO 82 in relation to the supporting text, paragraph 12.44. Again, well, that's a factual error relating to the minimum residual distance specified in the manual for streets being 2 metres as opposed to 1.8 metres. I'm not going to argue with the manual for streets, it's far too late in the day for that. Any other points in relation to TR7 or indeed in relation to transport and connectivity issues? No. Okay, well, thank you all very much for your contributions. I'm conscious it's been a very long day for the council. And I hope you all have a good weekend. And we shall adjourn until next Tuesday at 9:30. Thank you very much.